again how he's going to use my story in a powerful way. But it took me a long time to believe this because I thought my story was too shameful, too broken for God to use. And so I want to ask all of you ladies, do you believe that lie? That your story is too shameful to share? Maybe like me, you struggle with this. Or maybe you grew up and at a young age you became a Christian, and so you don't really remember your life apart from Christ. And so you think, how could God use me when I don't really remember a before and after? Well, I want you to know that each and every one of you has a powerful story. And I'm going to tell you today how God can use it. So a little bit about me and my life. God had been pursuing me all my life, but it wasn't until I was a freshman in college when I realized my need for a Savior. God used a hard time, a tragedy in my life, and it got me to realize that I was broken and needed Him. My freshman year on day 3, I was date raped in college, and so my life became depression and self-hate and shame. But up until that point, I didn't know that I was broken. I didn't know I needed a Savior, and so that moment brought me to my knees, and I gave Jesus my life. It was during that year that I began to experience this love that I hadn't yet felt, but it took a long time for me to feel brave enough to share my story. I thought it was filled with too much pain, and so at the end of this message, I'm going to share a way that God used my story in a powerful way. So be excited for that. But for now, we're going to dive into one specific verse and learn how our stories are powerful. So a little background information. This is happening in the book of Revelation. And there's this big battle taking place between the church, us Christians, and Satan. And so as believers, we know the end. We know who wins. We know Satan is going to lose. But have you ever stopped and thought about how? How's he going to lose? How are we going to have victory? So today we are going to talk about the 2 ways that we will have victory over Satan. Let's read the verse. They triumphed over him, Satan, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. So first, we will talk about how Jesus, by the blood of the Lamb, by his death on the cross, defeats Satan. So I want you to underline by the blood of the Lamb. And secondly, we will talk about how our stories defeat Satan. I want you to underline by the word of their testimony. And my hope is that you will leave here encouraged and motivated to share your story more often because our stories are powerful. So let's start talking about Jesus' death on the cross. This is the primary way that we are victorious. And it is an immediate victory. The moment Jesus died and we became Christians, we immediately gained victory over Satan. Look at the word triumphed. In the Greek, in the original language, this is in the aorist tense, which means that it is a completed action. So this means that we have already defeated Satan. We can live in victory. When you become a Christian, because of his blood, you defeat Satan. And we have victory over his accusations. So we can also defeat Satan by our stories, by the word of our testimonies. Look back at the handout and circle the word "and." Now, ladies, this is important. When you see this circle and when you see this word "and," I want you to remember that your stories are so powerful that they're in the same sentence as Jesus' death on the cross. That is how powerful our testimonies are. And when you look at this verse, it's right there. It's in the scriptures that our stories are powerful. One example of this, Christian writer Lisa TerKeurst, you might know her for some of her books. She wrote a blog post about the first time she shared her story of abortion. She said she was so afraid to share. She felt so shameful and broken. And she said as soon as she shared it, other women in the audience said, "Me too." And the freedom and the power that she experienced and the women experienced. And these were her words that she wrote after this. "Seeing God use the very thing that made me feel utterly worthless to help others changed everything. I was finally breaking free from Satan's chains of shame and could see his lies for what they were. And in that moment, I felt victorious. She felt victorious by sharing her most shameful thing with these women. She continues, not in my own power, but in the Lord's strength and ability to use all things for good. Ladies, never let Satan convince you that your story is too shameful, that your story isn't powerful to change lives and impact eternity. I want to ask you a few questions to get you thinking about this. When was the last time you shared your story with someone? When was the last time you shared how God brought you from death to life with a non-believer? If we keep our testimonies to ourselves, we are limiting God's power, because our stories are extensions of God's power. Our stories are extensions of God's power. Has Jesus set you free from addiction? Has he healed you from loss and heartache and pain? Has he brought you from death to life? I know that we can all say yes to that last question. And so that means that our stories are powerful. Satan is trying to win this war. He's trying to convince us that we aren't going to win, but we've already won. He has no power over us. And I want you to think about one person that needs to hear this. Think of one person that you could share your story with. And if you can't, think of someone, pray. Pray and ask God, who needs to know this? Who is struggling with believing lies from Satan right now? So how will the church defeat him? 1, by the blood of the Lamb, Jesus' death on the cross, and 2, by the words of their testimonies, our stories. So the verse ends by saying that the church in Revelations, let's read it. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. These Christians were so fearless that they didn't even care if they died sharing their stories. And so you're probably wondering what this string represents. You had to climb in the jungle when you came in and work your way around. But this string represents eternity. And I want you to take 2 fingers and hold a piece of this string. Where you're holding this string represents your life. And so your life is a dot on this very long string. But what is so cool is that this verse tells us that our stories are powerful. So powerful that this little speck on this line will impact the rest of the line. And so when we think about sharing our stories, maybe we have a lot of fears and worries. And we think, well, now's not the right time. And we pray, God, give us a better opportunity. Give us, bring someone into our lives who asks us what the gospel is so we don't have to just tell them. But the church, they didn't fear death. They didn't think about the dot of their line. They thought about eternity. And so I want to ask you all, are you going to spend your life thinking about this tiny little dot? Or are you going to spend your life thinking about eternity, this line? And this verse, it tells us, you can let go of the string. This verse tells us that even that dot, that mark of our life, is so powerful that it will impact eternity. We have to understand that God is so much bigger than our tiny little brains. We don't understand how it all works together. We don't understand how our lives, our dot, will impact eternity because maybe we don't see it. Maybe we will never know. But who knows how sharing our testimony will impact eternity. So I want to conclude with that story I mentioned in the beginning about how God used my story. So one summer in college, I went to Miami, Florida with Crew, a college ministry, for this summer project. And going there, I prayed, God, I was still kind of a new believer, and I prayed, God, just show me that my story is worth something. Just bring another woman into my life who's been through something similar so that I can tell her how God has healed me and redeemed my life. And so during that summer, he did just that. He brought this young woman, Fernanda, into my life. And she was also date raped her freshman year of college. And so I got to tell her how God had healed me and redeemed me and set me free. And the coolest part of this story is she left Miami and she went back to her college campus. and she felt called to share her story with every sorority on her campus. And just so you know the stats, sorority women are 74% more likely to be date raped. And in general, for college students, for women, 1 out of 5 are likely to experience sexual abuse. So this is a big issue on our campuses. And these women that she was sharing her story to were most likely hurt in some form and definitely needed Jesus. And so she was brave, and she didn't think about her dot of her life. She thought of eternity. And by the end of that year, she saw 98 sorority girls give their life to Christ. Wow. So my friend, she thought about eternity, and she shared her story. So no matter if you became a Christian at a very young age or how you became a Christian, no matter your testimony, it is powerful, and God will use it in a mighty way because our stories are powerful.